Bowie.
Good evening.
It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure being here.
On my humble show. It's a new CD, it's a new album, it's a new tour you're going to start soon.
Yeah.
Do you still count? Do you know what the number of the CD, the album?
Do you know, I have absolutely no idea.
You don't count?
20-something.
20-something.
Yeah.
I guess more into the 30s.
That's in recording studio. But I think with the 2 or 3 live things, we must be very close to 30.
Yeah. I will ask you whether, you still wait to see what everybody thinks. Do everybody like it? Or you say to yourself, hey, I'm David Bowie, I don't have to prove anything anymore.
Well, I never thought, hey, I'm David Bowie. I always thought, this is the work that I do, and I really, if I'm satisfied with the album and I know it's good, then I don't really pay much heed to anybody else about it. It has to stand up as being my work alone. I've been wrong several times in terms of whether I have an audience for that particular work, but that's not really part of the chemistry that I see is the work that I do. So I've been incredibly lucky in as much as over the years my audience seemed to have been very accommodating of the kinds of things I've wanted to do. And they understand that there have been periods when I've vacillated from one thing to another quite fast and furiously and frenetically, maybe over-frenetically. My ideas have changed quite radically as well. But they have always looked at what I was doing. And so it seems to me that I have just about the same audience now that I had, in the very early 70s, 73. It's not really changed very much. At least that's been consistent in my life, is my audience have been incredibly loyal.
Although I have the feeling that there was a time that there was some frustration because people wanted, maybe naturally, to hear the old stuff.
Oh yeah, and I backed away from it. I backed away from it tremendously, but I came out of what I consider to be a really a desolate period in my life in the 80s, which was very bad. Some of it was a very bad time for me creatively. I found that there was a sense of indifference to what I was doing, that a sort of stagnation that set in after the Let's Dance period, which was
a huge.
It was euphoric in itself. I mean, it was extraordinary and quite wonderful that I suddenly seemed to have this worldwide audience. But I hadn't anticipated what a change it can make to an artist to be received in quite that way, And my reaction was my fallback position was I better write for this audience, which is the first time that I'd really done that. Primarily, I'd always written for me, and if I had an audience for it, that was fantastic. But I started writing for this supposed audience, and I felt that I really lost the map. I was way off, and I wasn't enjoying myself.
And what took you out of it?
Well, meeting this guy, Reeves Gabrels, I suppose, was really consolidated what had been going through my mind for some time. In 1988, the last part of the second huge world tour that I was doing at the time, where I was just exhausted with everything, and more exhausted because I was dragging around a show and a bag of ideals and expectations which were second-hand to me. I didn't want them. I didn't want all that, and yet I felt I'd been trapped into all this. But my own fault. I trapped myself into all this. Certainly nobody else to blame. But then Reeves really sparked off my imagination into a way out of that dilemma, a way out of that quagmire. And it was really to strip everything down that I'd done, completely and utterly, virtually throw it all away.
I have to tell you, as a person that grew up on your music, really, that I find it very exciting.
Thank you.
Mainly because, putting talent and beautiful music aside, mainly because I find you more direct, more exposed.
Yeah.
Do you find it?
Yeah, I think I am. It's not a premeditated thing. It seems that over the last few years, I think it began with this, as I say, this early 90s. In a way, I was recapturing a lot of the enthusiasm that I originally had for writing and for singing and performing. And I guess that I just had to do it from a different way so as to keep it exciting for me and not to start falling into the same traps that I felt that I'd fallen into before. And the material just became, for me, significantly stronger than it had been for many, many years. And it heartened me, and I think I just started writing in a very different way, from a more personal point of view, less from kind of the narrator form or this Greek chorus thing that I'd adopted somewhat. You know?
And if I may take an example, the title song, Reality.
Yeah. It's
reality.
Yeah,
it's reality. And I get a feeling that you go back to your beginning.
Yes.
To your early years.
Yeah.
Say tragic youth you talk about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's a very clumsy metaphor, but I mean, it kind of sets up the scene I wanted to create about the seductiveness of life, and when you're a young man, and
maybe clumsiness. I don't agree with you, but clumsiness. But maybe if it is, it comes together with the erectness.
In rock, a clumsy metaphor can work wonders in rock if it's set to the right backbeat.
And then you talk about
it can seem almost intelligent.
And you talk about separating yourself from it with walls of sound. And then running and hiding in wretched highs, if I remember well, right? Yes.
I think I'm facing a lot of the dilemmas that I placed in front, placed obstacles that I gave myself. The wall of sound thing, I think, is an easy explanation. It was merely a metaphor for really work addiction. It's always all my life I've been kind of a workaholic, but for some of my life I used it as a way of avoiding relationships and avoiding kind of being part of the swim of society, because I had a rather romantic idea that the artist should be kind of isolated and in some kind of ivory tower, of distancing himself from the things that he was writing about. But of course what you end up doing is only writing about your loneliness, which is what I did album after album. And you go into a kind of a madness. But I think, I'm finding it a lot easier to write about my own experiences in life. Is
it the period in life that you go back and think it over again? Because let's take, for example, the persona thing. I think it's connected to what you just said, being romantic and being lonely and taking a persona, melting into a persona, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was, it was purposefully devised because I had a strange idea when I was younger that what I really needed to do, as much as anything else, was bring a sense of theatre to my kind of rock and roll. I didn't want to do quite what had been done before. There was something else I wanted to bring to it, a multi-dimensionality. It was kind of, I guess, the arty crowd in London at that particular time. We were kind of aware of this new thing, postmodernism, which was really striking at the heart of everything that was known, and it was tearing apart all the absolutes. There were no more absolutes, there were no more givens. It was about duality and pluralism, and it all seemed ripe, and the time for distancing from the art form that you were in and actually writing about it with the art form. So rock referring to rock was a new kind of, it was terribly exciting. It was we knew we were kind of deconstructing the whole apparatus of this particular.
Stay on stage and be there, limited to the stage, or did you take it with you?
No, of course, no. I mean, not at first, but I think at times, I started to not particularly see the line drawn between the offstage and the onstage character. But that's been so well documented now, I kind of,
tired of it?
It's not so much tired of it, it's just that I find it so not relevant to who I am now and what I do now. I mean, I had a, really troublesome period, and the whole of the 70s were a roller coaster ride which probably contain more negativity for me than positivity. Really, the last 12, 14 years have been the most positive in my life. Things have kind of, some sense of stability has come out of everything for me. Not necessarily a sense that I'm any writer about anything, that I've found any secrets. I certainly haven't. But I now feel that I have the tools to cope with any personal chaos that may still be buzzing around in my mind.
I'm amazed by the fact that you not only survived in this chaotic field of rock and roll, but survived in a way of staying in the front line, staying relevant, staying so influential.
Yeah,
Does it amaze you?
Yeah, it is. I mean, sort of at 25, you have no consideration for the future in quite that way. I don't have a consideration so much for the future now. I mean, I do try and take things, as the old adage goes, on a one day at a time basis. That's very much how I cope. But back then, you really had no idea of what the future, what this meant in one's life, in one's destiny. The idea of having a future really wasn't there. It was all pipe dreams. And
although you dealt a lot with the future.
Yes, well, again, it's the baggage of the writer to sort of, throw theory into a parallel universe of some kind, and my parallel universe was often the recent or the near future,
Can you say now?
But now, let me finish, is that I do have, the only sense of future that I have now is one that my daughter inhabits. So I have the future more material through her being and through her eyes. So I tend to want to, and out of necessity, have to think in a more positive way, because I'm not talking about just me anymore. I'm talking about a small child who needs to know that her father is positive and has a nurturing idea of what the future can bring. Because
She's 3-year-old.
Yeah, just coming up to 3. Because it would be awful for her to be 12 years old and say, Dad, those things you were writing in 2003, you were saying that everything's awful and the world's going to end, but you knew you just had me. Where does that? Thanks a lot. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of really, you change your focus considerably in that situation, because my natural inclination is to be far more, I wouldn't say existentialist at all, far more nihilistic about things. It's my, I guess again, it's a neo-romanticism. The idea of it's all hopeless comes very easily to me, which is the fodder of an overactive imagination in a writer sometimes. But now it's not a responsibility. I can't do that.
We've been very fortunate in being able to be to experience your parenthood as a very young man, and then 30 years on.
Yes.
That's a very unique experience.
It is a unique experience. Of course, what it does leave me with is a huge regret to a certain extent of what happened, that I wasn't there more for my son when he was very young, that I missed the first 5 or 6 years completely, really, because I was continually on tour. I was just touring all the time. And I can't allow that to happen again.
So is she coming to your tour?
Oh, you bet. Yeah. No, I'm going to force her.
You're going to force her, yeah?
Force her to be in the wings every night. No, but she'll be in and out with her mother, of course, in and out of the tour throughout the tour, The periods we have were so-called legs of the tour, enable me to get home and spend more time at home, and there are periods when they can come to whatever continent I'm on, and they can be centrally based and I can get back.
Does she understand your position in the world?
Absolutely no idea. No.
She doesn't have?
Absolutely not. No, she knows.
You try to protect her from this knowledge?
She's too young. She has no. She knows I kind of mess about with guitars and piano.
But tomorrow it happens. Tomorrow she'll know.
Yeah, but that'll, we'll face that when we get to it. But it's not, at the moment, I think she's delighted that I do that stuff. That music is kind of in there. That's great. And
your face change when you speak about her.
Well.
No, but you have experience from your older son. Do you think it's a shadow, or is it tougher to be David Bowie's son or daughter?
I hope that I gave him some. I hope I gave him some good earth to stand on by not subjecting him to media. You know, he never had to go through all that, because I was really quite cautious about him being sort of, you know, thrown into the lion's den, you know, which I feel it's, that's my personal responsibility, I feel. So if he wants to be involved in any aspect of a high-profile existence, then it's decidedly his choice. But he can remain not in that if he wishes to as well.
And what did he choose?
Well, he's making films, but behind the camera. He has no wish to be in front of it. And so that was his choice, and I think it's a very good one.
And you were speaking, it was very interesting for me to hear you speak about the change in perspective through your daughter, through your feeling, seeing things through her eyes.
Yeah.
10 years from now.
Yeah.
12. Now, when you, if you can, compare the childhood she has, not personally, but as a child in these, you know, troubled times, to your own, do you think she has a better one?
I have no way of paralleling the existences. That's very much, that's, I think it's chalk and cheese, as we say in England. I think they're so very, very different. Because of the circumstances, because of the context, the eras are so distant to each other, it's very hard to relate the two entirely. My background was fairly humble, in as much it was pretty much working class. Not that my father was particularly working class, but what he chose to do for a living didn't enable us to live in anything but a working class circumstance, because he worked for a charity organisation, children's homes, and there was no pay, you know, so the house that, you know, the area we were in was very working class. So I think at that, even at the basic economic level, it's so vastly different. Yeah, my daughter, of course, has her own castle. No, it's not quite like that, believe me. But of course, you know, from the material basis, it's very different. The structure of the household is very different. I mean, this is a musical household. It's, you know, my parents, it was not a musical household. Both my mother and father worked for a living, you know, at different times in my life, my younger life. There were periods where I was a latchkey kid, where I, you know, let myself into the house and, you know, wait for somebody to come home and all that. She's not going to be going through all that, you know. It's just so different, you know.
But
it really is.
I get the feeling that you enjoy your parenthood now in a very, very deep way.
I do. I mean, it was a real commitment, and it was really thought through. There was no, it was so important for me to, well, firstly, you know, the relationship itself within my marriage it came about because I was feeling that I was in a far more stable place. I had changed, and then we got married. It wasn't a question of we got married and I changed, you know. I don't think I would have gotten married if I'd felt that I was still pretty unstable. Things were still not really right, kind of emotionally in my life, you know. I underwent some major changes during the course of the 80s. And the same thing applies to my daughter. I really needed our lives to provide an incredibly strong bedrock for her existence, you know. It was very, very important to me.
I think if you mentioned love, I think that you speak about love in this album in a way you didn't before.
Yes, not quite so soppy, not soppy love.
Not soppy, but very
tough love.
Lovingly love.
Tough love, lovingly love. Lovingly tough love.
And another topic that I got a feeling that you deal with is age.
Yes, of course. Sure.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'm not sure if I can elaborate on it. The one song itself that sort of obviously is germane to that is Never Get Old, and it really started out as a tongue-in-cheek gesture. I thought it an absurdity for a rocker of 56 to say rather petulantly, "I'm never ever going to get old." It's like, it was just funny. it struck me as a very funny line. Always going to be enough drugs. It was just funny, but it became a stronger piece when I wrote it, and it actually feels quite a demanding piece. I'm surprised at its strength now. It really has some kind of weight behind it.
You talk about
I don't think it's from anger, not on my part, but it has a kind of, this is a real resolute kind of decision by this guy.
I would say not anger, but hunger.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, possibly hunger for every last drop of life that he can get. I think that's in there. But, I mean, in general terms, I'm feeling very, I have this theory about age, you see, with my generation anyway. Here we go. It's something, the premise is that my generation were the first generation to devise some feeble manifesto in the 60s. I mean, I was a teenager of the 60s. And our platform was for independence, for thought and deed, and sexuality and politics, and abuse of the body in any other way that we wanted to. We wanted to pull apart and form some kind of new alternative society. These were the flowers of the manifesto at that time. But what it's produced is a very independent-minded generation of people, I think, who, interestingly enough, took along with them their love of pop and rock music, so that you get, for the first time, my generation who have complete empathy with what our children are listening to, and in fact can go through their record collections and say, don't like that, that's good, but their first album was better, that's good, that, with some considerable knowledge of what their children are listening to. Likewise, the children can look through, my son, for instance, can look through my collection and find a Jimi Hendrix album and say, oh, I'll have that. And John Lennon, or, you know, that he can pull out stuff from that album and relate to it.
Both dead, by the way.
Yes, unfortunately. Or, that was a good album of yours, Dad. Scary Monsters, that was a good one. I can actually pull them out, and there is a real overlap culturally at that point, which has never happened musically with generations before. It's always been one generation, is, you know, if I went through my mother's collection of records, it would be South Pacific and, you know, this stuff. And I was saying, well, no Little Richard. You know, it's kind of, there was no way that chasm could be bridged. But
So
now
how did it come to the hysteria with time, with age, with getting old?
Well, it's just that we don't lose touch with each other in quite the same way, I think, the young and the old. I think the young are rather bemused by the fact that some of their fathers and mothers are more kind of excitedly going about life than they themselves are. I mean, you know, my age group look at the slacker generation and think, get up off your asses. You know? But there's another thing that's happening with young people, is that there's a very strong work ethic appearing that actually I don't see in my generation at all. There's a commitment to having a career, you know, which really is quite startling.
Anyway, we have to finish, so I want to wish you and myself to interview you in 20 years from now.
That would be, I've made a
and you too.
note of it.
Thank you very much for
Oh,
this
it's my pleasure.
conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Said you took a big trip. They said you moved away. Happened oh so quietly, they say. Shoulda took a picture, something I could keep. Buy a little frame, something cheap for you. Everyone says hi. Said you sailed a big ship, said you sailed away. Everyone says don't